Hello, everybody. A moment, we'll share the screen. My lecture titled From Psychoanalysis to Culture Analysis, a culturally sensitive revision of psychology. I want to share with you some ideas from my books and articles, mainly the last book, From Psychoanalysis to Culture Analysis. The main question that I deal with is whether Western psychology could be applied safely to non-Western people in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East, in Latin America. I'm asking this question because, in my opinion, psychology as a science has developed along with the development of individualism in Europe and North America and considered as a byproduct of it. It came to understand the individual who just appeared as an independent entity in Europe and North America. There is a continuum of collectivism, individualism. The individual in Europe became independent as a citizen within a state that cares for its citizens. State that cares for citizens allow the individual to be dependent on the state and get rid or be free from the dependency or interdependency with his family. But in the majority of the world, in Asia, Africa, South America, the states are not fully caring for their citizens. Therefore, the individual continue to rely in his or her survival on tribe and family. So the interdependence continue to maintain. I want to give 3 warnings before going on in dealing with these issues. 1, we need to avoid judgment according to skin color. Not every collective person or a person that comes from a collective society is really collective. Here you can see down in the continuum a blue square in the left, a person who came from collective society, but he maintained an individualistic way of living. And on the right side, you can see an individualistic person who maintained collective way of living. So we need to avoid judgment according to skin, but at the same time, we need to avoid color blindness. Cultures are really different, and we need to notice these differences and think about their meaning for applying psychology and mainly psychotherapy. The third thing that I want to warn is that individualism is not associated with progress, not necessarily associated with progress, and collectiveness is not necessarily related to retardation. We have many examples of collective society, such as Japan, China, Singapore, that are collective, but they are highly progressed in terms of science, technology, and many other aspects of life. I want to pinpoint 5 features that identify collective people. In collective societies, harmony and needs of the collective precede the individual's needs. So the individual is expected to obey the norms and the tradition and avoid being master of himself or herself and actualize himself or herself. Norms and traditions are more important. The contrast between the individual and the collective is that the collective gives support and safety and belonging to any person in the collective, but the person should give up self-actualization. This is the contract. This is the way of living within these cultures. The self, the meaning of the self is collective, and it is different than the self in the individualistic societies. When a person, while you are interviewing him or her, say, I think, I want, I need, he mean almost, we think, we need, we want. These cultures encourage values of obedience and respect to patriarchal authority. Therefore, assertiveness many times considered to be rudeness. Paul Pedersen, one of the leading figures in culturally sensitive counseling, considered culture the fourth factor or force in psychology. The first one, psychoanalysis, that bring to us the importance of unconscious drives. The second factor is the behaviorism and cognitive psychology that pay our attention to the importance of environment and inner thoughts. And the third factor or force or approach is the humanism that focus on the self and free will. So for Paul Pedersen, culture is a fourth approach or fourth force. For me, I think that the culture is not only a fourth factor, rather it is an overarching major factor, because culture define what are the unconscious drives that a person repress, and it determines what are the behaviors that are reinforced and what are the behaviors that are punished. It determines our inner thoughts, and it determines the self, whether it is individualistic self or collective self. Therefore, culture is an overarching major factor that we should consider as psychologists. These differences in collective cultures versus individualistic cultures make us revise several aspects or domains in psychology: developmental psychology, the personality theories, and psychopathology and psychotherapy. Let's start with developmental psychology. All the theories in developmental psychology, including Freud, Erikson, Piaget, object relations theory, all of them agree that the beginning of life starts when the child is completely dependent on his family, and slowly he goes through a track to be an independent entity after age 18, around age 18. Let's see it in a different way. The life begins, according to this theory, when the child or the toddler is dependent, and in adolescence, he gains partially autonomy, and as an adult, he becomes completely autonomous and independent. So this is the personality of individualistic person. All theories of personality claim that within the personality there are constructs such as superego, ego, self, values, id, drives. And between these constructs, there are certain processes such as conflicts or repressions or many other processes. In order to understand any behavior or symptom, we need to understand the intra-psychic drama within this personality. The main conflict is intrapsychic. And people cope with these conflicts using defense mechanisms to solve the conflict. And defense mechanisms, as all we know, is deceiving the ego and the superego. This is the main picture that we learn about the personality according to the Western theories of personality. Individuation in collective society is different. The beginning, of course, the same. The toddler starts his life dependent completely on his family. Then he gains partial autonomy, but as an adult, he continued to be related and dependent to the family. So this is the collective society where the individual is not detached completely from the family. So here we are talking about different personality theory, collective personality, where the individual and the family is one unit and not individuated. The intrapsychic conflicts, the intrapsychic constructs, such as superego, ego, self, drives, and so on, are collective and not autonomous. The norms explain the behavior much more than the conflicts between the intrapsychic constructs. The main conflicts are between norms, expectations, and oppression from one side, and coping strategies or mechanisms that are common within many collective societies. One of the main coping way is in Arabic called musayara, but in other places may have different name, but the meaning is to get along with the norms and the expectations. And people really try to get along with the norms and the expectations and obey the expectations, but they can ventilate themselves. And this is the istighaba. It is kind of ventilation where the person can find places or settings where he can express his feelings and thoughts and be free, but away from the observation and the control of the society. So you can see groups of women ventilating and talking about their husbands and the oppression that they are passing through, or you can see a group of youth people talking about their parents. This is kind of ventilation. And the other way of coping is identification of the oppressor. Within these societies, the weak parties, such as women or youth, many times find themselves identifying with the oppressing values and norms. So this is a way of living. Here we have different story of personality. Within a collective personality, the drama is intrafamilial, not intrapsychic. So the norms, oppressions, expectations from one side, and the coping ways or strategies from the other side. So we are talking about two different personality theories, and for who are interested in more details on this issue, you can find the article that I published in 2002, Foundations of Psychosocial Dynamic Personality Theory of Collective People in Clinical Psychology Review. Let's move to talk a little bit about psychopathology. the clinical picture of the almost all the psychopathology that are described in the DSM, the clinical picture is different in Africa and Asia. Many times you find in the literature that the people in Africa and Asia tend to somatize their psychological problems. It is a way of thinking, Western way of thinking, because in the West, there are a dualistic approach considering the person or the man, the human being. But in these cultures, they are more collective and there is no differentiation between mind and body, between individual and collective. They are living in a wholeness. Therefore, any stress or distresses that they experience, it may, or almost, it is represented also in a physical symptoms. Therefore, the depression, as it is described in the DSM, you can see in the left side, the main feature of depression is affect and mood of sadness, while in the collective society, people who passes in a distress and problems usually express their suffer in terms of body symptoms like pain or fatigue or suffocation or any physical symptoms. And if you ask them, how do you feel? They may say that they are okay, they are not sad, but they feel pain or fatigue. The main feature in depression among these people is shame and not guilt. They have many people around them and they don't feel lonely. They continue to hope for better future. They continue to try to cope within the collective. So the clinical picture of depression is different from the depression in the West, which is sad mood, guilt, loneliness, hopelessness, helplessness. I will take another example of the differences. In the DSM, you can find this disorder, dependent personality disorder. It is considered a personal disorder. If you look at the criteria, you can find that most of them are normal in collective societies. In collective societies, the people feel inability to make decisions without reassurance of the family or the tribe. They avoid personal responsibility. They experience intense fear of abandonment and rejection, and so on. So many of these criteria are normal. So if you use the DSM to assess the personality of the people, we may get to the results that all of the collective people has dependent personal disorder, but it is not a disorder. It is a collective way of living. It is different way of living. Let's move now to psychotherapy. When we read or learn about theories of psychotherapy and counseling in the West, we can find these goals of psychotherapy. To make what is unconscious conscious, this is Freud. Achieve self-actualization, many other theories, psychodynamic theories or humanistic theories look for self-actualization, to become assertive, to be yourself. These are the goals. From my experience and the experience of many other people who apply psychotherapy with collective people, apply Western psychotherapy with collective people, achieving such goals may be counterproductive for some collective clients because typically unconscious content is forbidden content. So revealing these unconscious contents may cause more problems that I will elaborate later on. To work with collective people, I suggest a model from several points. The first point is to be non-judgmental and to regard and appraise the culture and be empathic to the culture, and not to the individual, but to the culture. This is a Rogerian attitude that I adopted for the culture rather than the individual, because the culture is a collective wisdom. It is important for survival of the collective and the individuals. So we cannot we cannot reject the culture. Rather, we should be empathic and try to understand the culture from within. Here, we need to realize that psychotherapy is not a setting for social and cultural change, and it is not a place to serve the therapist's value. It is a setting to serve the client and help him or her to adapt better within her social and cultural system. So my values as a therapist may serve me and fits my way of living, but I should not impose them on the client who came from different culture. I should find ways to help him or her within her culture, within her norms and value system. Although we can apply Western psychotherapy, and if you look at the approaches in psychotherapy in the West, you can put them on a continuum. On the left, you can see psychoanalysis that digs deep in the unconscious. In the right, you can see many psychotherapies that focus on symptoms or problem solving and or behavioral or psychiatric. So to decide whether we can apply psychoanalysis or another psychotherapies that focus on symptoms and problem solvings, we need to evaluate 3 factors before deciding what kind of psychotherapy we need to fit for the client. The first factor that we should evaluate is the level of individuation of the client. It is not enough to know that he is African or he is Chinese. Rather, we need to find out how much he is individuated. So assessing the level of individuation is important. And we need to assess his or her ability to cope with conflicts and problems. Or if you want to assess the ego strength. Third, to assess the family strictness, how much the family is strict and how much it is flexible. According to these factors, we can decide if the person is enough individuated and he has enough ego strength and the family is flexible, we can apply kind of psychoanalysis. But if not, if he is collective and he is weak and the family is very much strict that can punish or reject him or her severely, we need to apply therapies that focus on symptoms or problem solving or behavioral or psychiatric intervention. And if it is not enough, there are 2 other ways to intervene. One is culture analysis. This therapy I coined before several years and I will elaborate on it later. It is to employ cultural norms and values for making change with the client. The other way of intervention is metaphor therapy. Metaphor therapy is really deep therapy and make deep changes, reaching the unconscious processes, but does not reveal, does not necessarily reveal contents from the unconscious, and not necessarily reveal forbidden drives or emotions. So this is a way that I recommend to apply, but from now to the end of my lecture, I will focus on culture analysis and give 2 examples how to apply it. Cultural analysis is a technique in which therapists employ alternative cultural beliefs in order to facilitate change. It is suggested as an alternative to psychoanalysis or as a precondition before applying psychoanalysis. According to psychoanalysis or all of the psychodynamic psychotherapy, people experience intrapsychic conflicts, and they look for compromise and balance between these conflicts. As long as the balance is maintained, the person is okay. But once the balance is not maintained and there is kind of repression, as you see in this figure, some symptoms may appear. Maybe anxiety, maybe depression, or psychosomatic symptoms. So as therapist or psychodynamic therapist, I should reveal the unconscious drives, needs, feelings, and make them conscious and make the person fulfill his needs and drives. But remember, these contents are forbidden. So he may face problems with fulfilling these drives and needs. The underlying assumptions of psychoanalysis is that patient's personality is independent and autonomous. 2, intrapsychic dynamic explains the psychological state or the symptoms. These 2 assumptions are not true for collective cultures. In collective cultures, the self is collective rather than personal or autonomous. The ego and superego are related to the family. 2, psychological state depends on intrafamilial balance rather than intrapsychic balance, as we saw when we described the collective personality. Therefore, revealing the unconscious content that are forbidden, such as sex or aggression towards the family or towards the parents, causes first tough conflict with the family, guilt feelings that paralyze the client from facing the family and fulfill the revealed content. Therefore, the client may be left with an open wound. Here, the way you can see it in the figures. Once we reveal the forbidden needs and the client is expected to fulfill them, he will face 2 things, guilt and the family. The family may reject him or her or punish him or her. And this rejection and punishment sometimes is physical, and sometimes it is threatening the life of the client, especially when we are talking about women within collective cultures. While psychoanalysis analyzes the intrapsychic conflict, cultural analysis analyzes the conflicts within the client's belief system and revise the ego and superego in order to deal better with the drives. The main axiom underlying cultural analysis is that all cultures and all religions, including kind of inconsistencies or even contradictions. Here is a field of any culture. Within it, there are several topics. The numbers are the topics. And for every topic, there is a directives, do or don't do, yes or no. Within the culture, you can find inconsistencies and contradictions. In the same culture, you can find directives saying, be assertive or be submissive. These are contradictions. In the same cultures, you can find be tolerant or be aggressive, fight. I will give examples later. If you look at Proverbs as having directives for the people, you can find in all of the cultures contradicting proverbs. Look here. Strike the iron when it is hot. This is one directive. Slow but steady wins the race. So, response immediately or delay your response. In another proverb, calling us to give up. And in the same culture, don't give up. Venture, don't venture. And you can find hundreds of inconsistencies in any cultures. Also, the religions. If you put in Google inconsistencies in the Bible, you can find hundreds of inconsistencies. Here we can find 3. Attitude to anger. In some verses, God is sometimes angry. In another verses, anger is a sin. Is God merciful or vengeful? In some verses, God is merciful. In another, God show no mercy. In another, God is vengeful God. Do sacrifices take away sins? In some verses, sacrifices can take away sins. In another, they never take away sins. If you go to the Quran, how merciful is Allah, God? In some verses, God is merciful. In another, God applies severe punishments. Tolerance in religion. In some verses, you can see no compulsion in the religion. So everybody can choose his religion and no compulsion. But in another verses, the Quran call Muslims to fight against the disbelievers. Who is responsible for evil action? All actions, good or evil, come from God, or good comes from God while evil comes from humans. In Western cultures, you can find also inconsistency. For instance, you can find values that are conservative and values that are progressive, right and left. In Western cultures, they encourage values of freedom and values of equity. Freedom and equity are contradictions. They are not go along together. So how people deal with these contradictions? The way that they deal with these contradictions, that they select their personal culture. Here is a field of culture. Suppose it is Western culture. In Western culture, you can see person A select his own Western culture, and he called for freedom. The other select another selection, and he called for equity, progressive or conservative. The same person alternate his personal culture, depends on the context. For instance, many male individuals and collective cultures adopt progressive values such as liberal values in the domain of politics or economic, while they maintain their conservative and oppressing values within their families. And they are alternating their values, and they don't feel any negation or any contradictions. Here is a picture that shows how two people from the same culture debate on several values. Each one select his own selection and alternate his values from one context to context. You can see how this conversation or debating not reach any real end. How we can apply cultural analysis? Before analyzing the intrapsychic conflicts, culture analysis suggests two things: to identify intracultural conflicts within the client's belief system, and to expose the client to alternative values from his culture that may facilitate change. Let's see it visually. Suppose that this client select from his culture that anger is a sin, therefore he suffered because he repressed any anger feeling. Psychoanalysis may expose him to another aspect from his own religion or belief system to permit his anger. Anger is possible. Here is a real client. A 40-year-old medical doctor with depression came to therapy after heart attack. He followed literally the Jesus sayings, love your enemies and turn the other cheek. Think about it. Who of us can apply literally these directives? As a result, he was oppressed and exploited by everybody, his wife, his colleagues. Obviously, he conducted his life while repressing his feelings, frustrations, and anger. For this client, revealing his anger will generate the guilt and conflict with the family. Suppose we applied psychoanalysis and we revealed this anger, which is forbidden according to his beliefs. Of course, he will feel guilt and he will confront his family and his colleagues, and maybe he is not enough strong to fight and to face these conflicts. Therefore, it was necessary during therapy to expose him to another side or aspect in Christianity that allow anger. Here, Jesus in Jerusalem expressed anger when he cleared, just a moment, when he cleared the temple of the money changers and animal sellers in Jerusalem. And here are another examples in the Bible that show that Jesus allowed himself to be angry and sometimes to be rude. Once this client realized that Jesus expresses anger, he was able to get rid from guilt and was strong enough to be assertive facing the family and colleagues. So exposing him to the other side of Christianity that allow expression of feeling help him to get out from his depression. Of course, the therapy is not only what I said just now. Therapy is very integrative, but I bring to you the cultural analysis part of the therapy. Here is another example. A 40 years old religious teacher, Muslim teacher, suffered from depression. He grew up as a refugee in a foreign village and suffered a lot of rejection as a refugee. In order to justify his existence, he became active in a philanthropic activity in the village, although continued to be rejected. The philanthropy does not help him enough. He explained his behavior as kind of charity, following one of the central Islamic values, أحسنوا إلى الله إن الله يحب المحسنين. His unconditional charity to good and bad people exposed him to tough exploitation that led to depression. Of course, in psychodynamic terms, his philanthropy was a sort of rationalization or identification of the oppressor, or kind of reaction formation even. Psychodynamic work that may reveal his pain and anger negated his rigid belief in charity and generated guilt. Also, CBT that encouraged rational thoughts was rejected by his religious beliefs. Within such a rigid belief system, it was not possible to make him aware of his needs and anger and be able to express it. Here you can see it visually. If we expose him to his personal needs and encouraging him to express himself and get rid of the charity value, he will feel guilt and confront the people around where he is not enough strong or ready for these conflicts. Therefore, in therapy, both of us start to learn more about the idea of charity and to learn more about values in Islam. One of the main values or teachings in Islam is اعقل وتوكل, means think and rely on God. The Quran calls people to think, to use their minds. So this allows us to discuss his personal experience and learn from his personal experience and allow him to think and make new decisions based on these Islamic teachings. The other thing that we try to understand, what is the meaning of charity in Islam? And we find that the Prophet Muhammad had said that one who provided charity, ihsan, to who does not deserve it, will make God angry. So the Prophet directed people to make charity with people who deserve it, not who exploited you. Bad people that do not deserve charity, you should not be kind with them. And we continue learn from many folk stories and proverbs that make him convinced that charity should be conditioned and not open to everybody. So before therapy, he applied unconditional charity. During therapy, he realized that charity should be conditional. Once he realized that he is able to think and make his own personal decisions according to aql wa tawakkal, and the charity should be selective, he became able to get rid of his guilt and confront the others assertively and express him and get out of the depression. Of course, again, here I'm bringing the cultural analysis part of a whole therapy, integrative therapy that work as a whole. A therapist that want to apply cultural analysis, he should look for alternating values and help the client move from strict values to facilitating values. For instance, from be perfect to be good enough, be pure to no angels on earth, to please others, to please yourself and others. From God punishes to God also forgives. No anger in family to anger is allowed also in the family. From sacrificing yourself to balance between give and take. Finally, cultural analysis and cognitive therapy is similar. In fact, I think any therapy at last is a cognitive therapy, because all therapies ends in changing the way the person thinks. Cultural analysis is a cognitive therapy, but it is backed by cultural values rather than rational thoughts. Because it is backed by cultural values, it is accepted more for collective clients. Unlike cognitive therapy that addresses the ego, cultural analysis addresses both ego and superego, because it makes changes in the belief system of the client. At the end, I can say that instead of applying the intrapsychic, analyzing the intrapsychic conflict between repressed drives and superego, culture analysis analyzes the inconsistencies within the client's cultural references. Instead of bringing repressed, forbidden drives to the client's consciousness, culture analysis brings more facilitating values to the client's attention that enable solving the conflict between drives and superego. Culture analysis enables assertive behavior and self-fulfillment without generating guilt feelings. Thank you.